Hey nerdy knitters, Tanya here. We've talked a lot about different sweater patterns and cardigan patterns and so many shawls, but I thought it was time to talk about your favorite patterns. So I asked last week about your favorite shawl knitting patterns and you really came through with some great ideas. Some I'd heard of and quite a few I hadn't heard of before. It's always nice to see new shawl patterns that I've never seen, and sometimes they end up on my someday knitting list too. But I'll share your favorites, and I also want to share some of my favorite shawl designers, not necessarily just patterns, but designers that I like to go to for inspiration or just ideas for things I'd like to knit. And very often more than one of their patterns ends up on my someday knitting list. So I'm going to share those, but first let's take a look at the patterns that you shared with me. Now the first one is one I've shared here before, so I was familiar with it, but of course it's your favorite as well, and I can see why. It's a great beginner-friendly pattern, the Boneyard Shawl by Stephen West. This is a great beginner-friendly knitting pattern. For those who are new to shawls, a top-down triangle shawl seems like it would be difficult, but it's really not. You're working increases at 4 different places, creates that triangle shape. You're working from the top neck edge and out. It's actually 2 triangles together that creates one larger triangle. And this one's really simple. It's just stockinette with a garter ridge in there, finished with a little garter edging. And there's even some options about which type of increase you'd like to use. He has 2 in there, yarn overs or make ones, and he explains each of those. And there's 2 options for binding off. And there's even 2 options for different yarn weights. You can use 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn or 3 skeins of DK weight yarn. But it's very easy to customize and make it smaller or larger depending on how much yarn you have, or even switching the yarn weight if you wanted to. Once you understand how it works, it's really easy to make it really your own. And for even more guidance, he has a free tutorial that you can follow along right on YouTube. If this is a pattern you want to try and you want a little more hand holding, then follow his video tutorial. He's a great teacher as well as shawl designer. Now, there's also a second Stephen West pattern that made this list, the Quadrangle Spires. Now, this one is definitely not for beginners, but it looks like lots of fun. Now this one is really architecturally inspired. It begins in the center. You're working 4 triangular sections and these form a square. Now each section is picked up from the previous section, and then when that square is complete, you pick up stitches along the 2 corners for the wingspan of the spires. And this one is easy to customize the length by binding off early or knitting more repeats for a larger shawl. But as you can see, there's a lot going on here, so I wouldn't say this is beginner friendly, but an advanced beginner or an intermediate knitter should absolutely be fine with this. It uses fingering weight yarn, 6 skeins, 3 skeins of a background color, and then a variegated yarn or leftover stash even for your contrast colors. Stephen West also has a video on his YouTube channel about this shawl. It covers the construction and choosing colors, so that's something worth checking out if you'd like to learn more about that shawl pattern. And he's got a great YouTube channel, lots of really good tutorials. He's a really great teacher, and I love his use of color in his shawl designs. His shawls are so unique. Of course, if you look at some of his older ones, you can see like the basic foundations, like his Boneyard Shawl. It's a really basic shawl, but he understands these basic construction methods so well that he can just take off and sort of break all the rules and create these really unique and colorful designs. And they're really popular for a reason, because the construction is so much fun. You've got all these unique stitch patterns and colors, and knitters love all of that. So it's not surprising that his shawl patterns are just wonderful and so popular. Now the next designer on this list was new to me, Beata Jezek and her Fading Stripes shawl. And this is a great construction method, very simple, even beginner friendly. This is great for beginners. Now it's an asymmetrical triangle, and that's formed by starting with a few stitches at one point, and you're working increases at one edge, but you're decreasing at the other edge. So you get this really long, it's the part that goes around your neck, that really long line. And then that decrease line forms one side of the triangle, and then the bind off forms the other. Now this one is just in garter stitch, and she's using 2 different variegated yarns here, so we get these interesting stripes. And I just love the colors she chose. It sort of fades between that purple and green and pink colors in there. Very, very simple knit, and it's a free pattern as well, and super beginner friendly. If you want to try an asymmetrical triangle shawl, then this would be a great one to start with. Now for yarn, you can use 2 full-size skeins of fingering weight yarn, or you could use 1 skein of fingering weight yarn and then use a set of mini skeins to work through to get those really fun colors. It's lots of choice. You could make it bigger or smaller, whatever size you want. You just keep going until you've got enough just to bind off if you're going to use some stash up. It's a really great pattern. Then you recommended the Kari shawl by Sari Nordlund, which is another fabulous triangle shawl, very easy to knit. Now this one's knit from the bottom up in a triangle shape. You're starting at that bottom point, you're increasing at the beginning and end of each row, and that gives you that triangle shape. And then you bind off right across the top. This is also done in garter stitch, and then you could add tassels or pom-poms to the ends. It's definitely a beginner-friendly pattern. This is super simple, easy for even beginner knitters to do. It's also a free pattern, and it uses 600 yards of DK weight yarn. Then there's a design that uses Madelinetosh yarn, the Mara shawl. I really like this one. I have a thing for ruffles, and this one really highlights how fun ruffles can be on a shawl. Now this one's a top-down triangle as well, just like the Boneyard Shawl. It's done with garter stitch, yarn overs are used for the increases, and then we have that really cute pleat along the edge. I just really love that. It's also a free pattern, definitely beginner friendly because it's just garter stitch, and then you've got that pleat that might be a little more adventurous, but it should be just fine. Now this one comes with 2 different yarn weights as well. You could use 3 skeins of DK weight yarn or 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn, but top-down triangle shawls are really easy to customize. You could just keep going if you have a lot more yarn. Just be careful about how much you're going to need for that ending pleat. Then there was a recommendation for Katie's shawl from Cozy Up Knits, which also has a fabulous podcast here on YouTube. Now this one is another asymmetrical triangle shawl. So you're starting at one point, you're working 2 increases at one edge and then decreasing at the other, and that gives us that asymmetrical shape. This one's also done in garter stitch, and there are stripes with different colors. You've got a bit of texture, really fun stitch pattern in there. It's definitely easy enough for an adventurous beginner because there's like a special stitch pattern in here, but if you're feeling adventurous and you're still new, you could definitely give this a try. Now this one also is intended to be used with 2 skeins of yarn or 1 skein of a main color and then some mini skeins paired with it. So you've got lots of choices here as well. They also have a video tutorial as well to walk you through the special stitch pattern in the design. Then you recommended one of my favorite shawl designers, Melanie Berg, and the recommendation was for her On the Spice Market shawl, which I haven't knit yet, but is definitely on my to-do list. Now this one's also an asymmetrical shawl. So you're working the increases along one edge and decreases along the other, and that gives us that asymmetrical shape. There's a mix of garter stitch, and we've got texture and some slipped stitches, and there's some short rows in this one as well. So definitely adventurous beginners or intermediate knitters should be fine. You've got the slipped stitches going on in those short rows, so there is a bit going on here. And I love her color choices. It's just a lovely, lovely design. Now this one uses fingering weight yarn. You want 1 skein for the background color, and then you'll use 6 different colors for the contrast. But it would be really easy, I think, to use mini skeins or stash yarn for all of those contrast colors. The next recommendation is for Taiga Hilliard's Twindom shawl. This one is really great. It's knit in a bulky yarn, really simple stitch patterns, perfect for beginner knitters. Even if you've maybe knit one little thing, you could definitely knit this shawl. Now this one is more of a crescent shaped shawl. You can see with those big yarn overs there, the way the shape is done. We've got these yarn overs worked at set points, evenly spaced along, and it creates these wedges, which is very similar to a top-down triangle shawl. It's just shaped a little bit differently. So instead of a point at the bottom, you get that crescent curved line. It's just stockinette stitch. There's a bit of garter. It's also a free pattern, definitely suitable for beginners. And it would be super quick to knit because it only uses 2 skeins of super bulky yarns. You'll get a shawl really quickly. So definitely recommend this for beginners. I really like the next recommendation, the Valona Shawl kit from We Are Knitters. I like rectangle shawls. Triangle shawls are lots of fun to knit, but as far as wearing goes, I really prefer long wingspans, and I find I get those the best with rectangle shaped shawls. And this one is also super easy to knit, definitely beginner friendly. It's just a simple rectangle you're casting on at one end for the width of the shawl, and knitting till it's as long as you want, and then casting off. It's just garter stitch, so it's very simple. But this one uses a linen yarn that's in a worsted weight, but it's worked on larger needles, so you get this more open and flowy fabric. This would be great for spring or summer. And it uses 2 skeins of worsted weight yarn. Now, along with rectangle shawls, I really like what are called kite shawls. They're these super long wingspan shawls they sort of fall in the triangle shawl family, but they're usually narrower and a lot longer wingspan. And it's done by working 4 increases at the edges. You're working increases at both edges on both wrong side and right side rows. And then on the right side rows, you're usually working a double decrease in the center, which gives you sort of this spine down the center of the shawl. And then when it's about the halfway point of what you want, you start not increasing on one edge, but still increasing on the other, and it shifts the way the shawl is moving, and that spine sort of moves off to one side. It's a bit hard to explain. I do have a whole video devoted to this shawl shape, so I'll link to that down below. But if it's a design that you'd like to explore, then the Cityscape Shawl by Yarnspirations would be a great free pattern to try out. So this uses a form of that triangle kite shawl recipe. It's just garter stitch, so it's very simple. You're doing stripes in 2 different colors. It's a free pattern. I think advanced beginners would be fine with this. You do have those increases and decreases going on, so there is a bit going on here. So if you're feeling adventurous, it's definitely something to check out. This one uses 4 skeins of a Worcester Aran weight yarn, and they also have a video tutorial for this to walk you through it as well. Then we also had a recommendation, not for a specific shawl, but for a shawl book, the Shawls for All book from Knit Picks, designed by Joyce Fassbender, and it's really a great book. I have a copy of it. I have no idea where it is. It's somewhere in this house, but it's really a fabulous book. It's sort of a mix and match book. You choose your yarn weight from 2 different yarn weights. There are 6 different shawl shapes, so you decide on the shape that you want your shawl to be, from like large circular shawls to triangle shawls, lots of different shapes, 6 different ones. And then there are 12 different stitch patterns for the body, and these are all lace stitch patterns. And then there are 6 edge stitch patterns, and then there's 3 bind off methods. So it's definitely a great book for those who want to do sort of their own custom shawl, but have some guidance along the way. You choose your shape and the body stitch pattern, your edge, like you just customize it and create something really unique. And if it's something that interests you, now is a great time to buy it because Knit Picks is having their summer sale and it's only $5 right now. So it's definitely worth that because you can knit so many lace shawls from this one book. Now, before we look at my favorite shawl designers, I just want to see if you have any more shawl recommendations, whether it's designers or a favorite pattern. Perhaps there's one that you've knit more than once. That's always neat. That's when you know that you found a great shawl pattern. So leave a comment and share with us those favorite shawl designers and patterns. And let's talk about shawl designers. Now that we've looked at favorite shawls, I want to talk about some of my favorite designers. And the top of that list, of course, would be Stephen West. And he's your favorite too, obviously. 2 people recommended him, and his patterns are so popular for a reason. They are just unique. They have so many fun stitch patterns and colors, and they're so playful is the word I think I would use. I just love the way he designs. Like, you can tell he really understands the basics because now he can just break all the rules and create these fun new shapes that we hadn't thought of before, and they're just so fun and interesting. Now, I've only knit one of his designs so far, but I have plenty more on my list. And the first of his designs that I knit was his dotted raise shawl. It's a top-down crescent shawl, so it has that basic crescent construction, and he uses these really large eyelets, so you get these really big holes. But what he does is he introduces short rows, so all of those eyelets end up looking like sort of rays of sun, all on these curved lines going across the shawl. Very easy to customize the size of it. It's just basic garter stitch, and you've got these short rows and these eyelets, but just a fun pattern because I find the shaping really fun. I'm not a fan of just knitting garter stitch all the time. I notice you are, though. A lot of these patterns are lots of garter stitch, but the introduction of the eyelets and the short rows kept it interesting enough for me that I really did like it. Now, if I just had to pick one of his other shawl designs to knit, then I would probably pick Exploration Station. This one is also a crescent shawl, and it's got those short rows, but then you've got the eyelets in there as well, and then all of these colors. It looks like it's lots of fun. Now, Melanie Berg also has a place on this list because my first asymmetrical triangle shawl was one of her designs, her Drachenfels shawl. And that one was also just garter stitch, some stripes, and a bit of slip stitch knitting. That was the first time I'd ever done that. And her pattern was great, walks you through everything very clearly. And she just has such lovely color combinations and just the shapes of the shawls and the way she combines the stitches and the colors. She's just got beautiful designs. And I definitely have more than one of her patterns on my knitting to-do list as well, but probably at the top would be her Sparks of Gray. I don't even really love to wear top-down triangle shawls, but I just really love this stitch pattern on this. And of course that ruffle. I just think it's fabulous how she uses just a rib pattern, but the way it's been blocked out on the shawl, it makes it look like a wide ruffle, and I think that's just adorable. For some reason, I just have this love for ruffles. I'm not sure where that came from, but I love them when I see them in a shawl. My third favorite shawl designer would be Andrea Mowry, and she designs lots of other things as well, but she's got some fabulous shawls. I've knit 2 of them so far. Goldfinch, which is an asymmetrical triangle shawl, but it's got lots of different colors and textures, and it uses short rows. It's lots of fun to knit. A lot of garter stitch again, but all those other things, it just made it really interesting. And it feels like the wingspan is longer on that kind. So I think it's really fun and easy to wear. And I didn't even follow her directions exactly. I used all different colors. I had a bunch of leftover stuff and it all worked out really well. And I also knit her Birds of a Feather, and that is a kite shawl, and it uses mohair yarn and sock yarn, and it's really lovely and fun to knit. That's probably one of my favorite scarves to wear. I wear it like a scarf. It's got a super long wingspan. It's not super deep like a lot of shawls, but it's great as a winter scarf. It looks great with my coat. I picked colors that would match my winter coat, and I wrap it around my neck, and it just feels so nice against my neck on a cold winter's day. Now, I definitely have a lot of her designs on my knitting to-do list, and a brioche shawl is at the top of my list. I haven't even picked one out yet, but she's got so many great designs that use brioche, and I think that's a great marriage with a shawl because you get that nice thick texture. They'd be great and warm in the winter. And I'd also like to knit one of her fades. I've never actually knit a fade project. It's probably like not as popular as it used to be, but it's still on my to-do list. So one of her faded shawls I think would be fun to knit. Now, Ambah O'Brien is also on this list. She does so many things with mini skeins and like advent sets and things like that. Her designs are just fabulous and fun. So many different fun shawl shapes, so many different colors, lots going on. I've knit one of her advent designs, the Adventuresome Wrap and Scarf. And I didn't have like all of the advent mini skeins. I just had like a 5 skein gradient set, and that worked out just fine. Her patterns are written so you can really make your own color choices. They're very easy to follow, really clear instructions. And I definitely have more of her designs on my list. Probably at the top is the Cherry Berry Wrap. I love the construction of this one. It starts at the center and then works out from there, and I think that's pretty neat. I've never done that before, so I'd really like to knit that one as well. And there's other designs that she has that I'd love to knit too, but that one's probably right at the top. Now, the next one on my list is a designer that I've never actually knit any of her designs yet. Believe me though, I've got quite a few of them on my to-do list. Lisa Haynes. She has some fabulous shawl patterns. This one that I especially like is called Festival of Stitches. It starts like a top-down triangle shawl, but then you stop making the triangle shape and you work out from both sides, so it ends up being a rectangle, but you've got so many colors and stitch patterns, and she just has a lovely way of combining stitch patterns and colors for these really beautiful combinations and shawls, and then these interesting shapes as well. What I think is really neat is these designers know how to take basic shawl shapes. We have discussed them all on this channel, all the different construction methods and how you use increases and decreases to create triangles and half circles and all these different things. Well, they know these methods very, very well, and you can add colors and stitch patterns, add short rows to make some changes in there. But then you can do other things to change those shapes as well, like Lisa Haynes taking a top-down triangle and then working out from both sides to turn it into a rectangle. Like, I love how they make these unique shapes based on the basic construction methods. So I just think it's very cool. And I'd love to know if you have another designer that you would recommend who does some great shawls. I'd love to hear about them. So be sure to leave a comment and share your favorite shawl designers with us. And if you're looking for even more shawl knitting patterns, check out this video right here where I share some of my favorite free shawl patterns. And I'll see you in the next video.